Joel, I think I yelled out that if you can't help us, get the fuck out of here. And someone called 911, and I do recall Mimi's voice in the distance talking to 911 and telling where we're at, and I tried to calm Joel down. We had a good rapport, so I just tried to calm him down and let him know that we were going to get through it because I didn't know what else to do in that moment. And then soon after, the medic and the best boy electric came into the church.
And I'm going to stop you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
The medic, do you recall her name?
Her first name was Cher. I don't recall her last name.
Okay, and who was the other person you said? Best boy?
The best boy electric, Matt Hemmer, I believe was his last name. He was Surge's second in command is what a best boy is. So the gaffer and the key grip each have a best boy, and then the rest of their department. And my understanding was Matt had some combat medical training, so he came in to assist the medic Cher, and I think
when right after the gun went off, do you recall seeing Ms. Gutierrez in the church?
I do not.
And did Mr. Baldwin stay in the church?
He sat down in that same pew, I think, in that moment when I yelled out that if you can't help us, you need to, get out of here. I think he sat down, and then at some point, I know I looked over and he was gone. So.
Okay. And in terms of your attention to Mr. Souza, what were you doing to him? Were you touching his body? What were you doing?
I was. So Joel was wearing kind of a thick hoodie, and I believe he had a T-shirt or a couple shirts on underneath. So it was start to figure out where Joel had been injured. He was certainly at that point writhing in pain and concerned for himself, asking me how Halyna was, and I think coming to the realization that he had been shot. So I was trying to find where he was wounded. So started pulling back his hoodie to reveal what appeared to be a circular wound in his right shoulder. And at that point, I think the sheriff and Matt came in. They had gloved hands. I didn't, so I had some of his blood on my hands. And I think I helped them roll Joel over. One of them had trauma shears to cut his shirt off, and then I helped roll him over, and I was in a position to see that what appeared to be a bullet just under the skin, basically where his right shoulder blade was, and he was in a great deal of pain. And I think that Cher gave me some gauze to just put some pressure on the wound while they attended to Halyna's injuries, which I gathered at that time were certainly much more severe because of her proximity to the firearm.
And could you hear Ms. Hutchins? I know you indicated that Mr. Souza was kind of yelling out in pain. Did you hear anything from Ms. Hutchins?
If I did, it was just, the groaning and discomfort from being shot by a firearm. I don't remember anything verbal from Halyna.
Okay. And At some point, did paramedics arrive?
Yes.
And if you know, at some point was Ms. Hutchins taken for medical care offset?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I stayed with Joel until they carried him out, and what I observed was they were trying to stabilize her. I heard them call for a lifeline, so they were trying to stabilize her to get her in a helicopter and get her to whatever ER they felt was appropriate.
And at some point in time, were you notified that Ms. Hutchins had passed?
Yes.
Mr. Adiego, when you heard the gunshot and you saw these people fall, did it occur to you in that moment that it was a live round, that there was a real bullet in that gun?
I don't, maybe not in that moment. I think it became clear when, like I mentioned, I rolled Joel over, helped roll Joel over to see what very much looked like a large caliber bullet just being barely held in by his skin.
Okay. And is this the first time in your life that you've ever seen a bullet?
No.
Okay. So you knew a bullet when you saw one?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever see Ms. Gutierrez after the gunshot went off?
Not until today.
Okay. And I want to back up. The people the camera crew that walked off that morning, did you know those people?
As well as you can know anyone in 2 weeks, sure.
Based on your time on set and everything that you knew about what was going on that movie set, do you have any reason to believe that any of those people planted live ammunition on set?
Judge, I'm going to object to speculation, lack of foundation, whether he knows any of that.
Well, I think he can answer the question whether he has any reason to believe that they did or not.
Counsel approach.
Do you have experience with real firearms?
Some.
When you heard that sound and you were, I think you said about 100 yards away, did you have any idea what it was?
I honestly didn't know if it was part of the scene. I didn't know if they had started or not. I did not. It didn't raise any major concern to me until someone came out yelling, "Call 911."
And is that something that you heard on your radio, or did you see that with your own eyes?
I saw that with my own eyes. I heard them yelling.
To call 911?
Yeah.
And what did you do when you realized that there was some type of an emergency?
I immediately ran into the church.
And what did you do when you got inside the church?
I saw Halyna laying on the floor being worked on by the medic, and Joel was to the left, and our dolly grip Ross was attending to him. And at that time, all the pews were still really tight up on them, so I immediately started chucking pews out of the way, and I moved the dolly, and I cleared room for them to work on Halyna.
And did you stay in the church while they were performing life-saving measures on Miss Hutchins?
Yeah, I did. I was, excuse me. I was directly involved in first aid with her for a number of minutes before the paramedics had arrived on the scene.
And when you say that you were directly involved in first aid with her, do you have any first aid training?
No, I was just assisting. The medic was having trouble keeping the oxygen mask on Halyna's face. She was flailing and tearing it off. And myself, the gaffer, Serge, and our Steadicam operator, Reed, were all around helping stabilize her. I had her head and neck, Serge had her arms, and Reed had her ankles, I believe.
Was it apparent to you that she had suffered some type of a serious injury?
Yeah.
And why was that apparent to you?
She was bleeding and in pain, and I saw the wound and realized it was life-threatening in the area that it was. And
When you say you saw the wound, where was that?
entry was under her right armpit, I believe, and exit was just inside of her shoulder blades, I think.
And did you see both of those, the entry and the exit?
Yeah.
Okay. And then at some point, were you relieved by paramedics?
Yes, the paramedics showed up and we all fell back and let them take over.
If you recall, when you were in the church attempting to render aid, did you see Ms. Gutierrez or hear Ms. Gutierrez?
No, they cleared the church pretty quickly. I pushed past whoever was maintaining the door at that moment and went in. But they were trying to keep everybody out of there.
Okay. And at some point then, did you leave the church?
Yes.
And when you left the church, where did you go?
I left the church because they were calling a helicopter and a lifeline or whatever you call it, and they needed a landing zone cleared, and I immediately jumped on Channel 3 with the Teamsters and called for the water truck to come over and clear out a landing zone, and I started trying to get vehicles out of the way. I actually hopped in a police vehicle, tried to move it, and quickly had an officer come up and say he would do it.
I'm sure. Did you take note of anything when you were outside the church? Did anything catch your eye?
I believe after that, the helicopter thing, I came back and saw Dave Halls and Hannah having a conversation. Dave Halls was asking Hannah to see the pistol and wanted to clear the gun and look at it and see what was in it. And I believe he retrieved it. I think in my initial interview I said she had grabbed it, but in my notes that I took afterwards, I believe he was the one who actually pulled the pistol out of the church and brought it outside.
And were they standing around or over a cart?
Yeah, there was a black Rubbermaid cart just to the left side of the door. If you're looking at the front of the church, just to the left, it was tucked in. It was already, it's kind of, for shooting, we always tuck things in tight around the door, and it was already there, and they were standing in front of it. And
what were they doing?
They were removing the bullets from the gun and attempting to check them and see which were dummies and which weren't, or what happened.
So, to the best of your recollection, Ms. Gutierrez hands the gun to Mr. Baldwin. Walk us through what happens after that.
The revolver is placed. Mr. Baldwin had a holster. That the gun was basically at his chest, and his action was to take the gun out and point it at the two U.S. Marshals, and he was pulling it out. I'm sure he was getting used to that action. He was in communication with Miss Hutchins about where to point the gun.
Do you recall, sir, was Mr. Souza also in the room?
He was.
Was Mr. Souza also participating in how to set up this shot? Do you recall?
No, I just recall that it was communication between Mr. Baldwin and Halyna.
Okay. And then what happened?
The gun went off.
When the gun went off, what did you think happened?
There's so many thoughts. Honestly, the idea that it was a live round of ammunition that went off was just not, it wasn't computing. It wasn't, and it was my thought was that a blank round had been loaded, and there had been another instance that an actor was killed from a blank round, and I just thought that there something in the blank round, a wadding. I had heard at one time that maybe they used pieces of wax to keep the black powder in the blank round, or was there an obstruction in the barrel? It just wasn't something I could compute in my mind.
Sir, after you heard the gun go off, tell us what you saw in terms of the reaction by Ms. Hutchins and Mr. Souza.
Ms. Hutchins is to my left, maybe 3 feet away. Yeah, it was my recollection that I might have been the first person to her. She was on the ground. Perhaps Ross Ariego might have been there, which would have made sense because he was the dolly grip, and he would have been close as anybody to Halyna.
Did you speak to Ms. Hutchins when you approached her?
I did.
What did you say?
Are you all right?
Did she respond?
Yes. She said, I can't feel my legs.
And when you're ready, just tell us what happened after that. Take a break if you need to.
I'm ready. I immediately left the church to make sure that 911 was being called. And then the set medic appeared, and she was treating Ms. Hutchins, and I stayed out of the church just to keep space.
Do you know where the gun was in these moments after it went off? Was it, if you recall, was it left in the church? Was it taken out?
I had an assumption where the gun was. What was going through my mind trying to determine what had happened. Again, the idea of what was in the gun that would do this to two people. Still, no ability to compute that a live round of ammunition would have been in that gun. And I said, in an effort to triage the situation, I need to know what's in that gun. I went back into the church. I went to the pew. On the pew was the revolver. I grabbed the revolver. I left the church. I went to Miss Gutierrez's cart, which is on, if you're facing the church, it would be on the left-hand side of the church, right, just immediately around the corner. I took it to her and I said, I need you to unload that gun. I need to know what it's in it.
And did she unload the gun in front of you?
She did.
And what was taken out of the gun?
I recall seeing 5 dummy rounds, again with the distinctive bright brass ends to them, and one shell casing that did not have a projectile on it, and it had a completely distinctive looking end to it.
When you say a distinctive looking end to it, what are you referring to?
I recall it as being gray, metallic gray. And I recall that it was just completely different looking. It's hard to explain. There was some kind of machining or something. Maybe it was raised. This is my recollection, but a more contemporary looking bullet than what I was seeing in the other rounds.
And let me ask you, sir, do you own guns?
I do not.
Do you shoot guns?
No, I do not.
At any point in time in the afternoon, after lunch, did you tell Ms. Gutierrez to leave the church?
Can you say that question
Did you
again?
tell Ms. Gutierrez to leave the church?
No.
Did you realize that she had left the church?
I did not.
Did you have an expectation that the armorer would stay with the gun?
That wasn't in my head at the time.
Well, but let me ask you, just in terms of your experience working on movie sets with guns and armorers, in your experience, does the armorer hand off a gun and then walk away and leave?
That's not my experience.
Okay. At some point, did you realize that Ms. Gutierrez had not stayed in the church?
I did not realize she had not stayed in the church.
After the gun went off, where was she the next time you saw her?
At her cart.
Okay. And you just didn't know whether she was in the church or not?
I did not know.
Okay. Sir, did you instruct Ms. Gutierrez or request that Ms. Gutierrez put dummies in the gun?
I did not.
Did you hear anyone ask her to put dummies in the gun?
I did not.
So when you're dealing with these other two revolvers and taking the dummy rounds out of them, and you said you threw them away, was there just a trash can right there?
It was a few feet away from the cart.
That was where you threw them?
Yes.
What do you do next, and what's happening next?
I don't know the order of events, but I know that I had called Seth Kenny. He didn't pick up my call, and I texted him emergency, and then he called me back.
Why were you calling Mr. Kinney?
I'm not sure why I did. He was kind of my mentor throughout this process, and I just called him. I told him what happened, and he was also freaking out, and that's all I remember.
And what did you tell him happened at this point in time? Did it occur to you that someone had been shot?
I didn't know Halyna was hurt. I just knew Joel was. So I told him that Joel was shot.
And at this point in time, has it occurred to you that Mr. Souza was injured by a live round?
That was my impression, but I didn't physically see his wound.
Okay. Because in your experience on movie sets, do dummies or blanks cause people to fall down and scream?
No.
So, when you spoke to Mr. Kinney, did you, if you recall, did you tell him any of the details about which gun it was or who loaded it or anything like that?
Not that I recall.
How long do you think that phone call lasted?
30 seconds, a minute.
Okay. After that phone call, what did you do?
Like I said, I don't know the order. But I know at some point, I had talked to Hannah. She was in the middle of a breakdown, and she showed me the rounds in her hand, and she said, I swore I shook them, and I could visually see that one of them didn't have the bullet anymore.
Okay, and her statement to you was, I could swear I shook him, or I swear I shook him. Okay.
Yes.
And before I forget, I still have State's Exhibit 163 on the screen. Do you know whose hand is in that picture? Who's holding the holster?
It's Hannah.
So, at any point in time, did you, well, after, and I understand you don't know the order of things, but after, if it did in fact happen after, Ms. Gutierrez shows you the rounds in her hand, do you know, was Mr. Halls there at that time?
Not next to me. At one point, I saw him next to Hannah with the gun by the church outside of it.
Okay. So, what happens next?
After that, I go back to the cart and I start rattling dummies from a box. And I notice that some of them don't rattle like they're supposed to.
And did you tell anyone what you realized?
Nicole was standing right there, and she saw. And then I had told the police later down at base camp.
You told them
That some of the rounds didn't rattle.
Okay. And at some point later, did you mention to Ms. Gutierrez that you thought like more than half the box didn't rattle?
Yes.
Do you think that more than half the box had live rounds in it?
No.
Why do you think? Why did you make that statement to her?
Originally, when I was checking it, like I said, it was chaotic. I was in shock, and I was frantically rattling the rounds. But as time went on, I realized that I had forgotten that some rounds might have had a hole on the side of the rounds.
So there were some dummies in there that weren't rattlers.
Yes.
Okay, they had the hole in the side.
I didn't visually see it, but I noticed that there were a couple rounds in there with silver primers.
Okay, you noticed some silver primers.
Correct.
To the best of your recollection, do you know how many silver primers you saw?
Possibly 2 or 3.
Okay. And did you rattle those or try to rattle those?
Yes.
What happened after that?
I was on my way back with Nicole and Daniel, the art director, to take the guns back to the truck. And then I got a text message or phone call from Brian Norvell asking me to bring Hannah's personal bag to her. And so Nicole and Daniel continued to take the guns back to the truck while I did that.
Who was taking the guns back to the truck?
Nicole and Daniel, the art director.
Daniel Ornitz.
Correct.
Okay. So you didn't take the guns back to the prop truck?
No.
When you were looking in the ammo, in the box of dummies, is that something that you just did on your own, or did anyone instruct you to do that?
I don't remember.
Did you take anything off of that prop cart other than the dummy rounds that you've indicated you took out of those 2 revolvers? Did you take anything else and move it back to the prop truck or anywhere else?
No.
Did you throw anything else away other than those dummy rounds?
No.
And Ms. Zachary, I have to ask you this. Did you bring live rounds onto that movie set?
No.
When the box of Seth Kinney 45 long Colt dummies came on set on October 12th, do you know, did anyone inspect that box?
No.
There's sort of a big group kind of hovered around where he would be. He would be sitting in the pew. I just couldn't see him. I'm not the tallest guy in the world. And so what I wanted to do was get up behind Halyna to try to sneak a look over her. There's a little tiny monitor on the side of the camera to at least see that, to see what it was looking like. But I never even got a look at that.
Okay. So explain to us when you're going into the church and why and what you do and what happens.
So I went inside again to try to see what the angle was. There were a lot of voices. I heard Alec's voice. I heard Halyna's voice. Everyone sort of talking at once. I don't have a clear memory of how long I was standing behind her. I know I got up behind her to try to see on the monitor, and there was an incredibly loud bang that was not like the half and quarter loads you hear on a set. Those are they're loud poofs and pops. This was deafening. And it felt like somebody had taken a baseball bat to my shoulder. I remember that distinctly, and sort of stumbling back and shouting. I don't remember exactly what I said.
Were you able to see Ms. Hutchins at that time?
I did. I remember sort of stumbling back, and I either fell to my knees or I was sitting, and I distinctly remember her being lowered to the ground. People had her sort of by either side, and I still didn't quite know what had happened. Nothing made sense. I remember initially thinking, had she been startled by it, and they were sitting her down as a result, and then I saw the blood on her back.
And to the best of your recollection, what happened after that?
It got very chaotic. I remember them laying me down. I remember them laying her down next to me. Although we were sort of facing in opposite directions, my head was this way, her head was that way. I remember a lot of panic. I still just couldn't figure out what had happened. I thought, was there something that had been stuck in the barrel that came out? But just nothing made sense. I remember our dolly grip, Ross, coming to sort of grab me and trying to call me, and then Matt Hemmer came in, and between the two of them, I remember they sort of tended to me and were pulling up and just trying to find out where there was a hole.
Do you recall, Mr. Souza, at any point in time during that general time after the gun went off, having any kind of an interaction with Ms. Gutierrez?
I remember at one point looking up and her standing there with another person or a few other people, and she looked distraught. And I remember her saying, I'm sorry, Joel," and I remember somebody just screaming at her, and they just ushered her out.
Okay. At some point in time, were you taken from the scene?
Yeah, it's funny. When I hear later about how long we laid there, it felt like 5 minutes. And I remember looking over and her looking back at me. And she's had the biggest brown eyes I've ever seen. And then, but I don't remember who they took out first. They put me on some kind of stretcher and rolled me out.
And where did they take you?
They told me they were going to take me to they just said they were going to take me to the hospital, and I kept begging them to take me where she was, but they said they couldn't and that they would later. And they eventually took me to, I think it's Christus St. Vincent, I think that's what it's called, in Santa Fe.
And when you were at the hospital, did you have an understanding that you had been actually shot by a bullet?
No. I mean, I knew something got me, but they kept talking about this bullet, and it could not compute for me. I just kept saying, you don't understand. No, this was a movie set. That's not possible. You don't get it. And they kept saying, no, it is. And I just keep insisting, you don't understand, because this is not possible. It's just not possible that there's a live round. It just can't. And then they eventually maybe grew tired of my protesting about it, because they showed me the x-ray of my back, and there was a very large bullet in it.
Okay. And sir, do you know whether Ms. Gutierrez was inside the church at the time that the gun went off?
I don't know.
In your experience, would you have had an expectation that she would have been in the church?
Yeah, the armor would be where the gun is.
Okay. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-examine.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
So, Mr. Souza, I think before you testified that before the Rust movie, your experience with firearms was on Crown Vic. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Okay, and that was a movie you directed.
I directed and wrote Crown Vic, yeah.
And you wrote that, okay.
Yeah.
And that, I think you said, had a couple scenes involving firearms. Is that right?
Well, where guns were fired, there were a few, yeah.
So you had an armorer on that set. Was that armorer full-time?
He was there for the days that the guns were going to be used or fired, yeah.
Is that the only occasion you've ever worked on a set with an armorer?
Yeah.
Okay. So is it fair to say your experience with working with armorers was fairly limited prior
Up to that point, yeah.
Okay. So are you familiar with the SAG safety rules, where if the armorer or prop master are not present, a responsibility falls on the AD?
I don't think I ever really reviewed the SAG rules. I don't think I would have been aware of what the procedure would have been if the armor wasn't there. I think my assumption was always that the armor was supposed to be there.
Okay, and you made an assumption, but if there's a SAG rule that indicates that responsibility then falls on the AD, are you aware of that?
That's not a rule that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. So you have not reviewed the SAG rules with respect to armorers in general, or firearm safety in general?
No, I'm not a SAG member, so.
Okay.
But no, I haven't, no.
Okay. So if in the church at that time, Ms. Gutierrez-Reed was not present, and you don't remember?
I don't.
Okay. But Mr. Halls was. He was the first assistant director, correct?
He was the first assistant director, yes.
Now, you don't remember, I think you said, seeing who handed Mr. Baldwin the firearm.
That's correct.
And I think you said, sir, you don't remember Mr. Baldwin even having the revolver. You didn't see it. I mean, he had to have had it, but
I know he had it before lunch.
Yeah.
I know he had to have had it for obvious reasons, but I didn't see him holding it in that. It never got to that.
okay. So before lunch, did you see who handed Mr. Baldwin the revolver?
No, I remember at some point before lunch hearing Dave call out Colt gun, but I don't remember who handed it to him.
My normal bag, and I ran towards the church. I wasn't very far from it, and as I was approaching the door, I heard medic emergency come over the radio.
And are you the only medic on set?
I am.
Okay. So when you heard medic emergency on the radio, did that information tell you where to go?
No.
How did
It
you
did
know
not.
where to go?
I was there. I was sitting there, outside the church waiting.
Okay, understood. Please proceed.
So I got to the door, and one of the things that we are taught when you're becoming an EMT is your scene needs to be safe before you go into it. So I stood at the door and I looked around to see what was happening, and I asked what happened, and somebody said, Halyna was shot, or the gun went off, something to that effect. And I looked down at Halyna, who had been sitting at that point to my right, and Joel was on the left in obvious pain. And Alec Baldwin was at the back of the church from me, the opposite end of the church from me. And then I looked down at Halyna again, and as I started going towards her, I believe it was our camera operator, Reed, had asked her if she could feel her legs. And for one, I believe she said yes. For the other one, she said no. And so I knew that there was some sort of spinal injury at that point. And as I was going towards her, I could see the blood dripping from her back onto the church floor.
Was she still seated at this point, or was she?
She was leaning kind of on a pew.
Okay.
And in my smaller bag, I carry trauma shears, and so I started cutting up the back of her jacket to try to find where she was bleeding from. And at some point in time, I believe it was Ann Shim, our second AD, asked me if there's anything that I needed or she could do for me. And before that, I'm sorry, I called out on the radio for somebody to call 911. We would need an ambulance. And Ann then asked me if I needed anything, and I asked her to get me my bigger trauma bag, because that's where I keep my trauma-related items. And she did, and I asked her to also call Matt Hemmer, who's one of our electricians. I asked her to call him because he had some previous military experience medically, and he was one of the people I knew I could get up there to help me. Being the only medic and 2 patients is not easy. And so I had him just take over for Joel while I tended to Halyna.
And so if you can kind of explain to us what kind of treatment you attempted with regard to Miss Hutchins.
When I cut up the front of her, or the back of her jacket, I'm sorry, I grabbed some gauze and I put it on the one hole that I could find at that point. And I asked, at that point, I believe it was Reed was next to me. I gave him a glove and I asked him to hold that gauze there. And sometime in the meantime, we had moved the pews, or the guys had moved the pews away and laid her down. And I went to the front of her to cut up the front of her shirt, to the chest area, to try to find the other hole, knowing that Joel had been shot. I knew that it was a through and through, or in one side out the other.
You already suspected that it was a through and through?
Yes, because
Okay.
because of the way that Joel was screaming in pain. I knew he had likely, whatever had gone through her had gone into him as well.
Okay, please proceed.
So I cut up the front and I could not find an entrance wound, and so I had to keep looking until I found the other wound. I didn't know what was entrance and what was exit at that point. and when I did, I grabbed another gauze that I have, and I put it there to apply pressure. And I'm not sure at what point. I think I asked Serge or somebody who was somebody else who was nearby to hold that and apply pressure while I went and grabbed oxygen.
Okay, and so give us just a little bit of information about your oxygen apparatus and what you did with that.
It's in my main bag, so I grabbed my main bag and pulled it over, and it's a non-rebreather, so it's the mask that goes over the face, and it has a bag at the bottom that inflates, and so the oxygen is delivered that way through the mask. It's got the things go around the back of the head, hold the mask on.
Okay, and just to be clear, we heard some testimony earlier in the trial about Ms. Hutchins being intubated. Did you have anything to do with that process?
I did not.
Okay. Go ahead and proceed.
So I put oxygen on her, and I called back to the ambulance. On the radio. I'm sorry. I called back on the radio to make sure to have somebody call back, or whoever was communicating with 911, that we would need 2 ambulances and a bird at that point, because I knew Joel would need an ambulance and she was going to need a helicopter.
You already knew she was going to need a helicopter.
With that kind of trauma, yes. We are 15, 18 minutes from the hospital, from town, and with the way that she was bleeding, I knew she was gonna need more than we could provide, or an ambulance could provide, or Santa Fe hospitals could provide. She needed to go to the trauma center in Albuquerque.
Okay. And do you have any knowledge about the condition that a patient has to be in order for the helicopter to take off?
They need to be stabilized.
And do you know why that is, given your medical training?
I do not.
Okay, fair enough. After you called for 2 ambulances and a helicopter, what did you do at that point in time?
I just continued. Halyna was fighting. She didn't want the oxygen on her face. She didn't want anybody holding anything on her. She was fighting. And Serge was there too.
Were you, after we understand that you were providing oxygen and that Ms. Hutchins was struggling with that, was there anything else that happened other than that before paramedics arrived and took over that you can recall?
There was a point in time when I first had walked in, there were still people inside, and so I had said to whoever was there, AD wise, to remove anybody that was in the church that didn't need to be there. If they weren't some of the people that I had asked to help, then they needed to be removed, Alec being one of them. That is minimal compared to what I normally would have on set. I would have no less than 300 usually before I would be approved to have an additional medic to come and help me. That is just not okay. That is not okay. And being the only medic there with 2 patients, knowing my resources were not close enough to help in any significant way, is what I wanted to change.
And have you suffered from extreme trauma as a result of this?
Yes. Can I just expand?
Sure.
No, no, Jeff.
Okay. Let's proceed. Upon my questioning, you asked if I asked you about your claim for emotional distress, and you responded and asked if you could expand on that. The court is going to let you. Please expand.
Thank you. I went home that night and I looked at my little boy, who's the same age as Halyna's son, and all I could think about is how I could not save his mother's life and how he was going to grow up without a mother, and how her spouse lost the love of his life.
Understood.
I did not expect this testimony. I did not expect this testimony. So you're going to, and I mean no harm to you, but we're going to strike that testimony, okay? So disregard that testimony, okay? All right, let's.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.
And Ms. Smith, how old are you?
I'm 51.
And when you were a younger person, did you have an opportunity to use the drug cocaine?
Yes, ma'am. I'm a recovering addict.
Are you familiar with what cocaine looks like?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with the way that cocaine is packaged?
Yes, ma'am.
Based on that experience, what did you believe to be in the bag?
I believed it to be cocaine.
And what did you do with it?
I threw it in the hallway trash can before even going downstairs to my hotel room.
And why did you throw it in the hallway trash can?
Because, like I said, I am a recovering addict. I can't, first and foremost, have it in my possession. And second, I was really very offended, and I didn't want anything to do with the situation anymore.
Okay. After October 21st passes, did you receive any text message communications from Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes.
And-
Several.
And generally speaking, what was the theme of those messages?
I want my stuff back.
Other than the bag containing the green bag containing the white powder, other than that item, did you have anything else that belonged to Ms. Gutierrez?
No, ma'am.
Did you bring this information to the attention of law enforcement?
No, ma'am.
Why not?
Like I said, I didn't want to be involved in the situation if I didn't have to be.
Okay. And how long after the incident do you think it was before someone reached out to you to talk to you about this?
I believe it was about September of 2023 when you contacted me about it.
And I personally called you?
Yes, ma'am. Texted, I believe it was.
Okay. And did you tell me on that day what you have testified to today?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll pass the witness.
Thank you, Honor. Ms. Smith, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, ma'am, that night when you went to Miss Gutierrez-Reed hotel room, you were called over and Miss Gutierrez-Reed was distraught, correct?
Yes.
Now, you were called over and there were, you could see she was visibly distraught, couldn't you?
Yes.
And didn't you say that you would stay with her that night, make sure she was okay?
I said I would stay with her for a little bit, yes, until court and the steward came back.
Okay. And at the time you left, had they gotten back?
No.
So before they got back, despite your word earlier, you left.
Yes.
Did Miss Gutierrez-Reed also go to your room that night?
No.
Now, your testimony is that the last time you used cocaine was approximately 20 years old. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So that would have been, I think, 31 years ago?
Yes.
And since then, thankfully, you've been clean. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So you have not seen that substance in 31 years. That's fair to say?
No, that's not fair to say.
Okay.
I have seen it, just not used it.
Okay. Now, you stated on direct examination that you believed it to be cocaine.
Yes.
And do you recall stating at one point that you said it could be cocaine or meth?
I don't recall saying that, no.
Okay, do you recall at your pretrial interview being asked the question, what was in those baggies? Inside the green, well, inside the snack baggie was the green baggie. Inside the green baggie was a white powdery substance, which I knew to be cocaine, or I mean, it could have been meth or something too.
It could have,
Okay.
but I don't believe that it was, nor did I state that I believed it was. I just said that it could be.
And that was my question. I'm just asking if you said it could have been meth too.
Correct.
So, in reality, it could have been a number of other white powders. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Do you know what creatine looks like?
No.
Protein powder?
Yes, because I work in craft services.
Okay. And we could go through a whole list of items, but there's a lot of white powder, powdered sugar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. So the reality is you have a belief, but you don't know for certain what was in that bag, do you?
Correct.
Now, that was never tested,
No.
and that was never provided to law enforcement.
No.
How long did you hold that baggie before you threw it in the trash?
I didn't make it all the way down the hallway.
So, how many feet do you think that was that you walked?
I don't even know how many feet the hallway is long, so
Can you look at the courtroom and estimate, just telling us?
possibly to the distance of the gentleman in the blue suit.
Okay, is he seated
Right
at counsel
here,
table?
yes.
So, would you agree with me that's about 20, 25 feet?
Sure.
Okay. So you walked 20, 25 feet, and were you looking at that bag the whole time, or were you having it down by your side?
At first it was down by my side, and then I, of course, raised my hand to look.
Okay, now, weren't you walking past some police officers too?
Men in uniform, not sure whether they were police officers.
Well, what do the uniforms look like?
They could have been armed security. I did not see an actual badge, so I could not say for sure that they were police. They were men in uniform in either security or police.
Well, do you recall being asked the question, why didn't you just hand it back to her? And you said, because I didn't want to do anything in front of the police. On page 19 of your interview?
Yes.
So at that time at your interview, you indicated they were police.
I indicated that I believed that they were police, yes.
No, you didn't say believe. You said, because I didn't want to do anything in front of the police. So were they police or not?
I don't know.
So you walk down 25 feet, you look up at it, and then you throw it in the trash. Is that right?
I looked at it and then waited for the trash can, of course. I didn't throw it on the floor or anything, so I did have to wait for the trash can to be there.
Sure. So you, in fairness, you probably had 5 seconds to look at this bag. Is that about right?
Yes.
So you had a 5-second glance through a white baggie and a green baggie, and you then based your conclusion on that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you also said that you thought this was about 4 to 5 sugar packets.
Correct.
Okay. Well, do you recall previously stating that you didn't know what the weight was?
Correct.
And do you recall indicating that it could be a couple of pounds?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, do you recall being asked question, so you have no experience with weight, and you testify, well, I don't know what it weighed. I mean, could be an 8-ball, but I don't even know what an 8-ball weighs. So, I mean, that's like asking me how much this weighs. I don't know. It's a couple of pounds. You want to see this?
No, I don't need to see it. What I was referring to was a body armor that I had already opened and taken a couple of drinks of, and I held it up and said, I don't know what this weighs. Maybe a pound or two. That was in reference to the body armor, not to the baggies.
Okay, well, in reality, in a 5-second glance, would you agree with me? You have no idea what the weight was.
Correct.
Okay. And you really, other than your guess, you have no idea for certain what was in that bag.
Correct.
Then may I just have one moment? Okay. Ma'am, last question. Do you recall in those text messages between you and Ms. Gutierrez-Reed, she at one point asked you back for her things? Plural?
Yes.
Okay. And so things is more than one, right?
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Redirect.
Ms. Smith, have you ever seen powdered sugar packaged like that?
Never.
Have you ever seen regular sugar packaged like that?
Never.
Have you seen cocaine packaged like that?
Yes.
You were asked some questions about your contact with Ms. Gutierrez inside the room. Did you, when you were in there, in Ms. Gutierrez's room visiting with her, did you speak with her?
Yes.
Did she mention to you that she was extremely worried about Ms. Hutchins and Ms. Hutchins' death?
No, ma'am.
What specifically did she say to you when you were in her room with regard to any concerns that she had?
She was concerned about her career. She was concerned about being prosecuted because somebody got shot.
All right. Nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ask one more question.
Can we approach real quick?
Yes.